We are just going to wait just a moment as people are coming in. Thank you for joining us for this fireside chat with a few of my favorite people that were ever born. I'm here with Chip Conley. Do you want to say hi, Chip?
Howdy, everybody.
And just to get it started, as many of you know, we have Alice Waters with us. We have Bruce Feiler with us. We have Monica Guzman with us. And Chip here to be in conversation with all of them with me. This is a celebration of Generations Over Dinner, which many of you are about to find out about, and specifically our holiday edition of Generations Over Dinner. And we figured we would ask some of the smartest people we know to share some of their secrets when it comes to making the holidays beautiful and bright and not something that we are terrified of and are avoiding or thinking, oh my gosh, here it comes. So that's the goal. And we're going to start with just a quick film before we chat with Alice about Generations Over Dinner. So Leslie, if you want to roll that film, it'll give you a sense of what this thing is.
Volume.
Leslie, we don't have audio.
We don't have audio, but it is beautiful.
So Leslie, you might want to restart and see if we can get that audio going.
We're going to try that one more time. We're showing you a short film about Generations Over Dinner. And if it doesn't work, we'll just start chatting.
Okay, let me try it one more time here. Can you hear?
How can we bring together multiple generations at a dinner table to talk about important topics?
It's
Great.
I definitely was unsure about how the dinner was going to go over. There's a divide a little bit between generations.
I was born in 48, so I am a baby boomer.
I'm Generation X.
I was born in 39.
A lot of people see the boomers as, okay, boomer, don't tell me your war stories.
We elder millennials have a little bit of judgment towards our younger members of our cohort. A lot of adults do complain that we're too negative about things.
It seems like we're on our phones a lot, and we are, but we do care about social justice issues, and we're more passionate about these things than I think people see.
We're looking to them to fix what's wrong. I love what my generation has done.
From the youngest member to the oldest member, there's so much to learn from each other.
Anything that connects people to folks who are not in their ordinary daily lives is powerful. You could really talk about things that are important.
The challenges and divisions in our world leave me feeling very helpless and paralyzed. I didn't imagine that having simple conversations could feel like an important way of responding.
Everybody listens to everybody else patiently, but everybody got a turn to speak.
It really was impactful to hear how everyone's different experiences contributed to their worldview.
We were able to find a common language and cut across those boundaries in a very authentic way.
We could use more generations at the dinner table.
All right. Thank you for making that work. So we are back. Thanks for taking a moment to watch that short film with us. You're going to learn quite a bit more about Generations Over Dinner during the second half of the hour. Let's bring Chip up so we can be side by side. Happy holidays, Chip.
Yes, Michael. I wish you were down here in Baja, but I know that maybe some of the people who were in your workshop last month are on this call. Michael was a guest faculty member last month teaching Love, Death, and Human Connection, and it was a gorgeous week.
It was an honor to teach next to you. Today, we're talking about holidays. But before we get into holidays and we bring Alice up, I'm going to ask you the question that I might know the answer to, but I want to hear it directly from you. Why is intergenerational connection so important?
Let's actually, I want to do something first, just to get our audience engaged. tell us where you're calling in from right now. Just go ahead and put it in the chat. It's just a good thing to know. And actually, if you want, tell us where you're going to be for the holidays, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas, just so we know where you might be. Let me start by saying, in terms of, listen, we live in an era where we have a lot of vexing problems out there in the world, and in the past, it was always the older people who tried to solve them, and the younger people had to deal with the implications of those solutions. And I think we live in an era today where the importance of these problems are more universal, and it's less clear that it's just older people who can solve them. And in fact, as has been said with the OK Boomer phenomena, it's the older generations that may have actually solved and created a lot of these problems. So I think getting multiple generations at the table to think of solving problems almost like a generational potluck makes sense. I'm very encouraged by my own personal interactions in both the workplace, when I've in fact even reported to someone who was 21 years younger than me, to also at MEA here at the Modern Elder Academy, where we've had intergenerational workshops that specifically focus on that. But we've had people from age 28 to 88 come to Baja and do one of our workshops or our online courses.
Beautiful. Well, we are going to bring up our friend Alice Waters to talk about the holidays. There she is. Hi, Alice. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So Alice Waters requires literally no introduction, but I will introduce her anyway. She is a dear old friend of mine and the founder of Chez Panisse and the Edible Schoolyard Project, many bestsellers. And my favorite is actually her newest book, We Are What We Eat. And that is a slow food manifesto, and it's available and it's beautiful and it should be required reading for all humans. So Alice, you talk a lot about people connecting over food, but also slowing down and appreciating the food that they're eating. We're about to go into a mode for many, not for all people, but for many, of a lot of feasting. How do you suggest people slow down and really appreciate the food that they're about to eat this holiday season?
Well, I've been feeding people ideas for a very long period of time, because I think bringing people together at the table with delicious food helps them to communicate in a different way. And so it's a very political intention that I have, that I want to win them over by taste. And I know that to do that, I have to have really ripe food. And the only way that I can have that ripe food is if I'm buying it close by from the people who are taking care of the land for our future, the people who are growing it in a regenerative, organic way, because I know that it's not just tasty, but it's deeply nourishing. And I can't say that they get that immediately, but I think that it's all about taste. So they respond. And the way to slow down is to go to that farmer's market and to spend the time to connect with people who feed us and the people who really care about the values that I cherish and that I think we all do. The stewardship of the land, the community, the diversity. What better place than the table to talk about diversity? Because food to be really special has to do with the, just the right apple, the right variety of apple. And knowing that that's going to be very tasty at this moment in time.
Yeah, I love
I have
the
a question for you.
Oh yeah, you
Paula.
go, Chip.
Yeah, no, I love that I'm going off script here because an apple is something that's ripe, and there are lots of vegetables and fruits that are ripe. And back in the old days, I don't know what we're doing in the COVID days and post-COVID days about touching fruits and vegetables in the supermarket, but how do you know when a fruit is ripe, and how do you know when a human is ripe? Because maybe it is that we actually, as we get older, we're ripening. And so it's just a sort of a big question. hard one to answer, but.
Well, I can just say that for 50 years, I have been only serving at the restaurant food that is locally available and in season. Now, I didn't explicitly say that at the beginning, but once I connected with this network of farmers and ranchers and fishers and all of those people, I realized that that's where taste is. And I know when we started the restaurant, we only had one menu, and we still only have one menu downstairs. So people who come have to eat what we give them. And I can just say that that is what really pushed me to find, all of these amazing ingredients from this whole group of people that really care about taking care of the land. And they're farm workers. And I know that, again, that that you don't know that necessarily when you're eating at Chez Venise. But there's something that you feel when you're eating that food. When you're naming the ingredients and giving honor to some of the farmers or ranchers, that people start to make those connections. And for me, that's the beauty of a meal, is that it happens in this moment in time, this very specific moment in time. And maybe the raspberries are too ripe tomorrow and you won't have them until next year. But I'm ready to let them go. I'm looking for what's coming next. And maybe it's pears. And maybe it's apples. And so we're just using our senses. And beauty is a very big part of this conversation, because it surprises people when you set a table with care, and when you have a bowl of beautiful fruit on the table. They may not say it, but they're feeling something. Did I answer your question, Chip?
The only thing I might ask as a follow-up is, what parts of your life feel ripe right now? There may be parts of your life that were ripe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but what feels ripe in your life right now, metaphorically? I mean, yeah.
That's a very hard question for me to answer. I just feel like I have this deep understanding of how to, I dare say, change the world, that I have the key to addressing climate, to addressing health, to addressing well-being. And it's not anything really new. I mean, cultures since the beginning of time have eaten food locally and grown it without pesticides and all of that. And as recently as 60 or 70 years ago, that's what we did. We never imported food from around the world, maybe coffee, tea, and spices. That was all. But you can't import food from around the world and expect to have ripe food or nutritious food. And so I want to really focus on what is happening where I live. And I know, because I grew up in New Jersey in the cold place, but I grew up, you know, sort of in my parents' victory garden in World War II. And it wasn't until the 50s that everything changed, that fast food and corporate farming came into existence. And I really believe that it brought the values that are really now not only destroying our health and the environment, but our democracy. Because we are learning, or we have learned, that more is better, that time is money, that you should be able to eat in your car, that food should be fast, cheap, and easy. And it's never been that way. People always made a priority for food and sitting at the table and educating their children and taking care of the land. And all of a sudden, here we are. And it's been abandoned. And so I think knowing that coming back to that place is so gratifying, that it's something that what do I want to say? I want to say that when you start being engaged in that way, you can't let it go. It's like, you know, everybody wants to come to the table. I always light the candles first and make sure that there's some flowers nearby. But I am sure that this is what we need to teach our children in public schools. And I really feel like if we change the food in the schools and we really focused on the food that is locally available and ripe and supported all those farmers and ranchers, I think it would be something amazing. And this is what we all do every day. We eat and go to school, or we should. All children should eat for free at school. And this is an opportunity that we have to change the procurement to organic, regenerative food.
Well, and we're going to share about Edible Schoolyard in just a moment, because we do want people who have the ability to help support that project. But because we're talking about generations over dinner, and you had an extraordinary mentor who lived to the age of 102, I think, Lulu, and died about a year and a half ago, if I remember correctly. And I'm just wondering if you could share with us one piece of wisdom that you learned from Lulu.
There's always room at the table for another person. Always, always. If her children came in the middle of lunch, she'd add chairs to the table. And she welcomed everybody as if here she was her best friend. And I love that about her, that there was this sense of a big family. And even though she, in her later days, was not actually preparing food, she always came to the table with that sense of pleasure and welcoming. Probably that's the most important thing I learned from her. And she was never worried about, people liking it or not. She just hoped that they would. But she never, was giving instructions, if you know what I mean. Eat all the rest of your food, eat everything on your plate. I want people to fall in love with food, and then everything works out.
I love that vision. Chip, anything to add before we have Alice talk about Edible Schoolyard?
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Alice.
You're so welcome.
Well, the holidays is a season of giving, and we love the work that you're doing so much. I'm going to put the link in the chat as well for Edible Schoolyard. But just really briefly, we only have you for a couple more minutes. Tell people about the Edible Schoolyard.
But this was a project that just happened to fall into my life about 27 years ago, when the principal of a middle school in Berkeley with 1,000 students called me up and he said, would you come and help beautify the school? And I just said, okay. And I went over there and I discovered that these middle school students were speaking 22 different languages at home. I didn't know it would be such a good test case. 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, teenagers. And so we decided, and he was willing to let me do whatever I wanted. And so I said, I want a kitchen and a garden classroom, not to teach cooking or gardening per se, but to teach all of the academic subjects. And so we began building a garden. It was a very big area, but we cleaned all the broken up asphalt and we built this beautiful garden. And we took over an old bungalow and turned it into a beautiful kitchen. And it began I was a Montessori teacher, I have to say, because I believe that learning by doing is the best way to learn. And the education of the senses, very important. So I wanted people to be touching and tasting and experiencing a garden, even if it was a class in music or math. The students would be outside and smelling the flowers or hearing the bees or opening up our senses. And those are our pathways into our minds. And this computer world that we're involved with, we're not doing that. We're not experiencing the world in a sensual way. And I think it's very damaging to our minds not to have the beauty of the world around us coming in through our senses. And it's like we're in jail in a way, that we're not experiencing this. So that is what has happened at the Edible Schoolyard. And what makes me so bold with my ideas is that just from that one school, there are 6,200 schools around the world on our network. And I don't just mean in Italy and England and Japan, but in Saudi Arabia and Uruguay. And it's something that is reaching people in the place of human values, that they know that we need to teach our children the values that they need to live together on this planet.
Yeah. Well, thank you for building such an incredible gift.
It's so exciting
Yeah.
to see 6th, 7th, and 8th graders wanting to come into the kitchen classroom after school and just do their homework. I mean, it's like, it's what we need. Our schools have been industrialized like our farms. It's one size fits all. We're teaching to an idea of, making money, going to college, all of this. We're not teaching the values that we need so desperately to live together.
Yeah. But we're starting to once again, thanks to you and many others. All right, my dear. Well, have a wonderful holiday. Thanks for joining us. We're going to bring up Bruce. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Edible Schoolyard is in chat. Take a peek, take a link, give if you can. And Bruce Feiler, how are you?
Gentlemen, how are you? Happy holidays. Great to be with you. What a treat to hear the legendary, we were chatting before we came on the air, and you asked me if I had known Alice, and I said that I spent many years of my life writing about food at a gourmet magazine under the auspices of also a great Ruth Reichel, and I just said to Alice, like, I know so many of us feel that we're all on her, we're all apples on her family tree, and we're all so grateful for all that she did for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me introduce you officially, Bruce. I can't list all of your accolades, but some of them. I believe 7 New York Times bestsellers, which is, that's an unbelievable achievement. Millions upon millions of people have watched your TED Talks and also your shows. And you've changed my life personally, and many times. I'd say most recently with the book, Life is in the Transitions. Everybody should grab that book. But the question I have for you, and then Chip, I'll turn it over to you. And this really relates to how you changed my life, was you taught me that knowing our family history, one's own family history, is actually a wellness activity. It is something that can give us great psychological benefit, which I'd never thought of it that way. So I'd love for you to tell the people that are listening, because we're about to go on the holidays. We have an opportunity to learn more about our families if we're spending time with our families. Maybe we aren't, maybe we'll do a Zoom call, etc. But why is it so important to know our family history?
Well, first of all, thank you for that, and I'm so happy to be in this circle. And I'm not sure there's anybody on planet Earth who has done more to share my work in recent years than you, Chip. And I'm grateful to be included in this conversation. It means a lot to me, and I do think there are things that we can talk about how to have family conversations. But to sort of answer the question about sort of why, in part, that they matter. This story actually, in some ways, goes back to where I was a few minutes ago. I spent many years writing about food, and I was actually writing a piece about family dinner. And it's interesting is that to a little bit throw a few perhaps live squids on the on this beautiful table that's assembled for Thanksgiving. Family dinner is actually somewhat complicated, right? Because on the one hand, we know, and as Alice just beautifully said, how meaningful conversations can happen over dinner, and yet many of us don't do this on a regular basis. I'm sorry, I got some feedback there. Americans rank 33 on a UN list of 35 countries of people who have family dinner together, and it's complicated. And so I was writing a piece about family dinner, and I actually called Lori David, who wrote a book about family dinner, in Los Angeles, and she said, "Bruce, you don't want to talk to me. You want to talk to Marshall Duke." And I never heard of Marshall Duke, but I tracked Marshall Duke down, and as Marshall now likes to say, I invited myself to dinner at his house. Marshall is a 50-year a veteran psychologist at Emory University. And in the summer of 2001, he learned something from his wife. His wife, Sarah, works with special needs students. And she said that she noticed that the students that she worked with who knew more about their family history were better able to navigate the various challenges they had from being children with needs, I think as we call them today. And so Marshall and his colleague, Robin Fibish, set off in the summer of 2001 to do this study. And they created what I later, when I wrote about this, called the Do You Know test, which was a series of tests, a series of questions about your family history. Do you know where your grandfather was born? Do you know an aunt or an uncle who had a difficult problem that they overcame? Do you know what was happening with your parents around the time of your birth? And the children who knew more about their family history were better able to navigate their own ups and downs in their lives. And they compared this research with a raft of other studies. It was the number one predictor of emotional well-being. And I said twice that it was the summer of 2001 because that later that summer was 9/11. And they went back and they retested all these kids in Atlanta, and they found that the kids who knew more about their family history were better able to navigate this collective trauma that the entire country was going through. And so I wrote about this in my book, The Secrets of Happy Families. I wrote about it in a New York Times article called The Stories That Bind Us. Maybe the MEA folks can share the link to that in the New York Times. And it was like, it was the most emailed article in the Times for a month, and one of the top articles on the entire planet that year. And what happened was I began to hear from people all over the world who were interested in some ways in family history. And this article sort of changed my life in a lot of different ways and sort of sent me down this path that to a certain extent brings me here today, which is understanding the role that storytelling can play both in pulling us apart, but also in helping us draw closer together.
So much. Chip.
Wow. Well, Bruce, it's so good to see you. Thank you for being an important part of our community, and one of our guest faculty members on our online course on transitions. So let's apply the theory of transitions and the 3 stages, maybe to how you show up for the holidays this year. How might we look at, the fact that what often happens is you're just a normal, relatively happy human being out there in the world, and then you show back in your hometown with your parents or with uncles or with siblings or with kids, and you become a raving lunatic, and you take on an archetype that you haven't actually seen in yourself in the past year, except last year at the holidays. So how might you apply some good mindset thinking here around the 3 stages of transition applied to holiday gatherings?
So let me say a couple of things about this. I want to first of all say I was just listening. Listening is the wrong word. Swimming in, bathing in, marinating in what Alice was talking about before, and what was going through my mind. I love what you said. I'm thinking about the time that I went to Chez Panisse, and there was it was so I don't know, like a shaker chair. It was very simple. And, you come in, there's fresh vegetables. I remember there was a radish on my table the last time I was there. But what I was thinking of, again, to go back to I like to throw live squid on the table here, was what Alice was talking about was we need to slow down and think about food and where it comes from and our relationship to it and how it can affect us together. Okay, so nobody would go to a Thanksgiving gathering without planning the food a little bit. Okay, I look at you, Chip, like, who among us has done more in the many things you've done to think more about space, right? And like what space means as a place to sleep or to gather or to play or to learn, right? That's how I think about you. You would never go, you would never host a Thanksgiving meal or go to a Thanksgiving without thinking about the setting or what you're going to put on the table, right? Or that. I mean, the flowers that Alice has that are shaming all of us who don't have flowers. I've just recently, can I just call attention to my recently upgraded fake plants behind me, right? So and yet, if we did a show of hands right now of the 200 people gathered in this call, and say how many people would dare go to a holiday gathering without planning the conversation, my guess is we'd have 190 people. Okay, that's unimaginable. We put all of this attention into these other things, and yet we don't put almost any attention. I have Happy Families, my book sitting here on my table, and I was because I was digging through it the other day, and because I was looking at sibling rivalry. Why do sibling rivalry, why is it such a problem in families? Is because we take our siblings for granted and we know they're always going to be there, and therefore we don't attempt to make those relationships better. That's what conversations are like. They are the sibling rivalry of gatherings, and that we just take them, the conversations are just going to happen. I mean, if I've been a professional writer, I sold my first book 33 years ago this month, okay? If I were to I've written 15 books, blah, 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 blah. But if I were to list on the 100 skills that it requires to kind of do what I do, the writing and the thinking and the interviewing and the traveling and the talking, whatever, I would put asking questions in my top 5%, like a skill that I have. I've probably asked hundreds of thousands of questions. As you both know, I've interviewed hundreds of people about life transitions in the last few years, including Michael Hebb, I will add. I would never go into a family without thinking. I mean, like, I'm good at it, and I still would never go without planning. So I think, okay, so now with that preamble, everybody needs to plan it. So how can we plan it, right? And one more plug for planning your conversations, I would say, how many articles, how many clickbaity headlines have we all seen on the internet in the last few years about, this is what you should not talk about. Like, don't talk about politics and don't talk about religion. Well, I mean, you can see the pictures of me traipsing around the world talking about religion behind me. Like, I like talking about the difficult things, right? I like having difficult conversations. That's why I'm such a fan of Michael's. It's like, we're going to have difficult conversations, but you don't start with the difficult. You start with the simple, because you have to build up trust. So I write a newsletter called The Nonlinear Life. I actually sent out a piece a few hours ago about tips for having meaningful conversations this holiday season. And so to kind of pick up on what I've been thinking about the last few days, I would say, let's start safe. Okay, let's start with a simple, safe conversation that will build trust and make everybody feel confident, right? So you asked me to talk about through this prism of life transitions. Life transitions have 3 phases. There's the long goodbye, where you shed the old you and you mourn the past. There's the messy middle, where you get rid of certain habits and try new ones. And then there's the new beginning, where you unveil your new self. So I think that this is, in the long goodbye, we have to say goodbye to the outside world and all of the baggage that we've showed up, right? We'll remember, oh yeah, Chip did that thing in June that pissed me off, and I'm waiting for an apology from Chip, and I don't want to be seated next to Chip because I'm still annoyed with him. Oh yeah, and then Michael said that thing to my sister-in-law last year, and does he even know that she spent 3 months crying and said she would not come if Michael was showing up? So we've all come to this with our baggage. So let's start with a very easy question, sort of like, You know, in the preview, you had something about tech, like what's an app that everybody uses, right? You know, tell me something you noticed in your neighborhood this fall that you know, how things are changing. Okay. What's the best, you know, a great question. What's the best piece of culture you consumed this year? Could be a movie, a book, a play, you know, a piece of poetry. I have been in dozens of, this is a great conversation because a 5-year-old can answer it, right? Good night, moon, and an 85-year-old. So we're going to start with a very simple question that's going to allow us to leave our preconceived, oh yeah, I kind of like Michael. Yeah, he did that annoying thing last year, but of course he's interesting. Like I'd like to know what Michael is reading. Oh yeah, well, Chip did that annoying thing in June, but my gosh, Chip, his travels all over and he can tell us. So we're going to start with a safe question. Then I like conflict. I like very controlled conflict that has, you know, some boundaries to us. And one way to do safe conflict, like I wouldn't go with like, who do you know, who's going to control the house, right? Or, you know, who stopped going to church in the last year. I like that kind of stuff, but I wouldn't go that. But let's do fails, okay? What's the worst Thanksgiving memory you've ever seen, right? Who burned the turkey the hardest, right? What, you know, I was just moderating a panel 10 days ago of families with intergenerational conflict. And I started this way, like, what's the kookiest, strangest food that you've ever eaten at the holidays? Okay. Now, it was interesting. Everybody had an answer except the 3 people who were fighting the most. So they're like, we don't have any, I mean, they were so tense from this thing because we, you know, in my family, it was, oh my gosh, can you mute me, please, Alice? It was the congealed cranberry in the can that we would slice, and we had a little turkey cutter, and we would cut the little pieces of turkey, and then we would slice an orange and put it on top. Like, okay, or the fruit compote that my mother made with canned fruit from the 1950s that we would drain with like macarons and almonds, and we had this thing. Like, everybody's got a story of a fail, of a strange thing, you know, and if you really want to be bold, it could be like, who was the most difficult guest that you've ever had? But so I like a kind of a kooky conflict that releases some tension. And then I would end with pure raw emotion, okay? I would end with, what do you have to be grateful for, right? Or what are you looking forward? Or what's a hope? This is a time of war and division. You know, what's a hope you have for our family in the coming year? And people have been warmed up. They've gotten a little steam off. There's been some laughter, and then you end with straight, earnest, real emotion.
Wow. All right. You have your operating instructions, people. We're
coming up with a structure. Who could have imagined?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is we do have the holiday edition at generationsoverdinner.com that has exactly this. It doesn't have the structure precisely, but now you have that from Bruce. And then if you want a bunch of other great conversational starters that you can, you know, really engage your holiday table with, we've got that. So Bruce, we've ran out of time. I mean, this is the holiday crew I want to go get a drink with and spend hours with, but we don't get to do that tonight. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for all you guys do, and I look forward to that collective drink, and happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays, Bruce. And I think we have Monica coming up.
Yes, hello.
Yes.
How's it going?
Good. How are you, dear?
I'm great. This is a good week. Good, grateful week. And happy to be here with all you.
Perfect. And have you met Chip before? I don't know if you two have met.
I don't think I have. Hi.
I think we have, Monica. Great to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Well, I think it's going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. So Monica, to introduce you to everyone, Monica is a senior fellow for public practice at Braver Angels, which maybe we'll talk about, and author of the recent best-selling book, I Never Thought of It That Way, and How to Have Fearless, Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. That is one book, has a very substantial subtitle. And you have thought about this a lot about how we come together. Oh, and there was this great quote that I wanted to pull from the New York Times because it was so perfect about Monica's book. I can see this book helping estranged parties who are equally invested in bridging a gap. It could be a signed reading for fractured families aspiring to a harmonious Thanksgiving dinner. New York Times. So it's as if they knew we were all going to be talking. So politics. How do we talk to people this holiday? Our family. Somebody wants to get in the conversation. How do we talk to people, friends, family, maybe there's some strangers around, with so much political divide? What have you learned?
Oh my gosh, so much.
Yeah.
I think one of the main things is to remember that we are talking to people and that it's not just about the ideas. We tend to engage online with just idea versus idea, and it's a showdown. The internet is a non-place that makes us into non-people. So we start forgetting that each opinion, each perspective comes from deep roots, a whole biography, a set of values and experiences that have led a person to where they are. And that means that we come together and we have that same posture of, this is my opinion versus their opinion. Who will win? I'm going to take a sense of pride from that. A combativeness needs to be here, or I'm not going to feel like I'm defending my side or standing up for good things. And so I think that's happening more and more. And I've talked to lots of folks who approach their family members and feel like maybe, they now are not just them, they are every liberal, every conservative, every stereotype that's been wrapped up in our sort of tribalistic, discursive culture. So it really begins with that. You're talking to a person. Deep, deep mysteries we all are. And whatever you read in that thought piece or whatever statistic told you that demographically everyone who does this believes this for this reason is not true about this individual. So you are there in conversation. It's a privilege to connect your perspective to theirs and see what you discover. Talking about politics, that's tough. There's some places where there's some families and some tables where to keep the peace, the idea is we do not talk about politics. The problem there is for a lot of people, politics is personal, very personal. It's who they are. Some political disagreement feels like a non-acceptance of them and who they are and what makes them up. So I've talked to people also who say, my parents decided no longer to talk about politics, and now I feel like they're no longer talking about me. So it's too bad, right? But I've heard from older generations that, man, it wasn't always this way. And we could kind of with a chuckle say, we're not going to talk about politics, and it was fine. But today we have folks who feel a sense of non-acceptance if they can't talk about things that are meaningful to them. And politics is one of those things. On the other side of this, I've also talked to folks who are going, I can't talk to my family members about anything because everything is political to them and everything triggers them. And I don't even know where to begin. I'm afraid to sit down next to them anymore. So it's real tricky.
Yeah.
Wow. Yes, it definitely is, Monica. I actually have not read your book, but I'm looking forward to doing so. I have a quote I want to just sort of throw out there and get your perspective on it, because it does feel like curiosity is often missing. And at MEA, curiosity is one of the most important ingredients to the MEA ethos. This comes from Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner, if I'm not mistaken. He says, I am not entitled to have an opinion unless I can state the arguments against my position better than the people who are in opposition. I think I am qualified to speak only when I've reached that state. What do you think about that? What do you think about the idea that we can be able to maybe take down our guard and be able to articulate the other side a little bit better as one of the solutions?
Oh, absolutely. I think of a couple things. One is John Stuart Mill on liberty, that famous quote, he who does not know the other side of the case, he who only knows his side of the case knows little of that. We tend to surround ourselves with like-minded people. It makes us more comfortable, especially in turbulent times. The last thing we want is more challenge and more friction and more conflict. The problem is when we deny friction, when we avoid it, we surround ourselves with people who share our instincts means we surround ourselves with people who share our blind spots. And that's the cost, is when we stop sharpening each other with that friction, with that challenge, when we stop getting together with people with whom we respect, but we know disagree, and allow those disagreements to come up and just kind of rub us up against each other a bit. There's a great quote too from Michel de Montaigne about how we rub and polish our brains against those of others. And that's what we do. That's what we have to do. A lot of folks talk about, the threats to democracy in our democratic society, and it's got to be us versus them, and that's what's going to save our democracy. That's what's going to destroy our democracy. It's the friction, it's the running away from friction that I think causes the real harm.
Amazing. So, what do you think are the conversations that most effectively connect people?
Yeah, there's two types of conversations that do that most effectively. When we're talking about things we disagree with, when we're welcoming friction and different perspectives. And the first one is asking people not why they believe what they believe, but how they came to believe what they believe. In the first, you're asking people to get on a stand and make their defense. And you are entering a conversation of evaluation and judgment, right? Are your reasons good enough? Well, what about my reasons? Let's see. The second question, how you came to believe what you believe, is a question about story. So you're releasing people's stories. And lots of research has shown us that if you want to be understood, right, and all you do is insist your reasons at each other, it's going to be a lot harder to get your meaning across and for people to sort of understand you than if you occasionally sit back and say, well, let me tell you about something that happened to me. And you give that story of, I faced this situation, I faced this dilemma, this was the pain I went through, and I ended up like this. I remember some years ago, I talked with a friend here in Seattle, and we had very different opinions on guns. And what I didn't know was that he had been mugged, as a young man. And he was telling me that story. And as he's telling me that story, I'm putting myself in his shoes going, whoa, like what would I think about guns had that particular thing happen to me? The other type of conversation that I think really helps people connect is asking people about their concerns. So we tend to, again, just the arguments, just the showdowns. It's all we see. It's all we know. But you can ask people, what concerns you about abortion? Tell me what ultimately worries you about the conversation around the environment and climate. And so that is a really beautiful, non-judgmental question. What it does is it gathers information, right? So you invite the person to share their worries. There's a brighter way to ask it, which is, tell me about your hopes. If this happens, what do you hope to see? And you're just gathering that information. And as that information comes out, you can then get curious. You can say, wait, what do you mean by that? Tell me more about this. Flesh this stuff out. Color in the lines, right? And what you start to get is a person, a human being, who is nuanced. And you can't just label one way or the other and judge. You have to contend with their story and their path. And then at some point, if you want, you can say, I see it very differently. Can I tell you what I mean? And then you tell your story and you share your concerns, and then your conclusion becomes rich with depth.
Yeah.
Wow. I think we all want to take the three of you, Alice, Bruce, and Monica, to our Thanksgiving table with us. You guys you're awesome. So beautiful.
There
Michael,
they are.
Thank you to all three of you. I mean, man, this is such wisdom. And I want to say to you, Alice, you are ripening right in front of us. What's been beautiful is you've over 50 years been someone who's just continuing to ripen in new ways. And so I just want to make sure that you know that it's witnessed by us. Michael, tell us more about Generations Over Dinner and why this initiative is so important.
Well, a couple of my great inspirations are on this call with me, Chip and Alice, and also Bruce. and Monica Newly in the work that you're doing, you know, have done it so boldly. I have been passionate about gathering people at the dinner table for a very long time and doing exactly what Bruce was talking about, thinking about not just where the food came from, but what do we do at the table that makes it a place that we want to continue to come back to, right? It has to, like, we have to have this thirst for gathering around the table. And to do that, we have to consider it and we have to program it. We have to intervene. We have to inspire people and give them new rituals. And so that's what Generations Over Dinner is. It's a challenge. How many generations can you bring together at your dinner table? And I don't just mean your grandmother and great grandmother and your kids. I mean the age diversity of a silent generation person, a boomer, a Gen X, and a Gen Y, which we have right here on this call today. This is 4 generations of wisdom being shared very intentionally. And when you do that, it's almost like I imagine it like, and it's almost a cliched metaphor, but I'm going to use it anyway because I think it's really powerful. The wider the age diversity is at the table, it's almost like this great bird that has wider and wider wings. And it is absolutely true that you will go so much further in conversation and you'll go to magical and wild places you've never imagined if you get that kind of diversity at your table. So we're inviting people, we're challenging people, we're giving them the resources and tools and scripts so that they can succeed when they do have one of these dinners. It's all at generationsoverdinner.com. And people should mark their calendars. We have this beautiful collaboration with AmeriCorps on the National Day of Service. So it's MLK Day, January 16th. We're bringing together AmeriCorps fellows and young activists around the country with senior living organizations and residences around the country to have a conversation about volunteerism and service. And people will be able to host these dinners in their own homes everywhere as well. So look out for that. And then also right now, as I mentioned before, the holiday edition of Generations Over Dinner is available. It's on our website. You just put in your email and you'll get a bunch of conversational prompts for Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Christmas, whatever it is. But Chip, I hand it over to you. Any wisdom to share about gathering this holiday season to close our time together?
Well, I guess I would just finish by saying, by the way, I have about 15 to 20 family members coming down here to Baja to our new home over the holidays. Very excited about that. I just need to remind myself, what are the archetypes that I tend to revert back to when I'm amongst the blood family, and maybe have a sense of humor. Carol Dweck, in her work on mindset, which we teach at MEA, has said that the 3 key steps towards changing a mindset and maybe changing an archetype would be identify it, and then actually maybe create a ritual to get rid of it. That's sort of like the ending of something. Have a sense of humor about it and look for the triggers that actually take you back there. And then thirdly, don't just get rid of the archetype, actually consider maybe what are you replacing it with? And that would be a great way to look at it. So maybe this week, this holiday season, you look at what's the archetype I'm ready to get rid of? How do I identify it, have a sense of humor about it, and look at the triggers that tend to take me there? And then thirdly, what am I going to replace it with? And if you actually do that, maybe you will show up with a different form of who you are over the holidays. It doesn't mean your family members will do the same. Yeah. But at least all you can do is your side of the sidewalk.
Well, I'm just going to recap what I've learned. Beauty is revolutionary. Taste can be revolutionary. Focus on it. Plan the conversation just the way that you plan, how you're going to brine your turkey. And remember that they're people, right? They are people. They are humans. I mean, that really, I almost started crying when you brought that up, Monica, because it's so obvious. And then Chip, is reminding us to take responsibility for ourselves, right? Do some work, not just point at the other person and get rid of some stuff. I admire, respect, and love all of you. Thank you for being here. And thank you, everyone who joined us.
Have a great holiday season. We'll see it. I'm sure we'll see some of you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Well, thank
Thank
you.
you, Alice, Bruce, and Monica.
Bon appetit.
Bye-bye.
Best of all, thank you.